A very good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning. It's lovely to see you all this morning, and it's great for us to be in the house of the Lord. I'm going to open for us in a word of prayer, and then we will get to singing our first hymn.
It's good to be doing this reading today on Harvest. I'm reading from Mark's Gospel, and it's chapter 6, and I'm beginning at verse 30. The apostles gathered round Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000.
Thanks again for this opportunity of sharing something about the work of TearFund this morning. Imagine you've had a long, hard day. You're tired, weary, and all you want to do is sit down on the sofa and watch your favourite soap opera, Coronation Street. But, as always happens in those occasions, there's a knock on the door. And you answer the door, and there is a group of people. And they say to you, "We're tired too. We're hungry. We've got nothing to eat. Can you help us?" Now, come on, what would you do? Would you slam the door in their face and say, "Nothing to do with me, thank you very much"? Would you send them down to the local church? Let the vicar sort them out. It's not my problem. Is that the essence of our response? Or would you invite them in? Come on in. Sit down. We'll send out to the local chip and you can all have fish and chips for your supper. Which of those two would you choose? Come on. Really? Our Bible reading in Mark 6, we're faced with a very similar situation. We're told that there is a crowd of 5,000 men In my version, though, it says there are 5,000 men and their families. So what's that total up to? 10,000 plus people? That's a big crowd. I support Rochdale Football Club. We only get 3,000, and that looks big. And they're tired. They're weary. It's been a long day. And towards the end of the day, the disciples realize that they have a problem. They also have a very hungry crowd. So how do you feed such a large crowd? Well, they go up to Jesus, obviously, would have the answer. Jesus has the answer for everything, doesn't he? And so the disciples go up to Jesus and tell him, look, this crowd, they're getting tired, they're getting hungry. Won't you just send them away? We don't want to get involved in other people's other problems. We don't want to have anything to do with it. Let somebody else sort it out. They'd rather leave them, this crowd, this hungry crowd, to themselves. But listen to Jesus' response. What did he say? Did he say, yes, go on, you do it. You get rid of them? No. He says, no. You feed them. We feed this massive crowd? 10,000 plus? It's impossible. It would take the equivalent of about 8 months' wages, and we just don't have that kind of money. It's beyond us. It's just it's too much for us. They would rather just send the crowd away. Leave it to someone else. But still, Jesus says, no. Look, what have you got? And they go away and they come back. And I'm sure this was a kind of little joke on Jesus, because they said, well, actually, we don't have 8 months' worth of food at all, but we've got 5 loaves, 2 fishes. And Jesus takes the bread and the fish, and he blesses it. And all the people sit down in 50s and 100s, and the disciples take the food round. And at the end of the day, what does it say? All the crowd had enough to eat. They were satisfied. All from 5 loaves and 2 fishes. But more than that, when the crowd had gone away, the disciples went round with the baskets, and they filled these baskets, 12 baskets full. What we see as impossible with Jesus is made possible. With God, nothing is impossible. Do you believe that? We read it in the Bible, but do you believe it? We are faced with a similar situation. But our crowd is not a mere 10,000. In the world today, there are 750 million people living in extreme poverty. Now that's a massive figure. When you think of the population of this country, what's it, 60, 70 million? It's at least 10 times that. It's a crowd beyond our imagination. So what's our response going to be when you hear people like me coming to tell you, We need to feed these people who are starving to death. Are you like the disciples saying, SOE, it's someone else's problem? Or do you hear the voice of Jesus saying, no, you feed them? The disciples saw it simply as a money problem. And we are in danger of seeing it in the same way, as a money problem. However do you get enough money together to feed 750 million? It is impossible, isn't it? Instead, Jesus wants us to focus on what we do have. For we, each of us, this church has the equivalent of 5 loaves and 2 fishes. What's that amongst so many? Well, in Jesus' hands, anything is possible. Is that true? Do you believe it? Well, TearFund have been looking at this passage, and they've been applying these principles to help those who are in such dire need. And they've introduced a program called Church and Community Transformation. And what does that mean? Well, the whole principle behind it is that we are called to help people help themselves, to lift themselves out of poverty. The idea is to help people identify their own 5 loaves and 2 fishes. To use what they have, the talents that they have, the gifts that they have, to build themselves and to build a future that has hope written through its heart. CCT does what it says on the tin. TearFund is partnering, as I said earlier, it is working through the local churches. And it helps those churches identify what the needs of their community are. And it looks at ways of people can use the resources and the abilities and the different gifts that they have. And so, by using their abilities and resources they have, they can actually make a future. CCT is about helping people to help themselves. Basically, it is a Bible-based teaching and training program. With the local church, they help develop skills people need. They help identify resources that are readily available locally to lift themselves out of poverty and for that community to thrive. TearFund produced a very short, I don't know whether you saw it on TV, they actually produced an advert. It's only very short, but it does give you a simple flavour now of what CCT is about. Can we show our first video? Yes.
This is Burundi in Africa. And this is Cecile, who's walking to fetch water for her family.
Oh, yeah, saved.
Oh, okay. Well, then what's in the bucket? This is the school that your donations built, brick by... Oh, then who built it? Of course. Your generous donation.
Oh, yeah.
This is the centre of the community that your donations... No, look, it's not, is it? Okay, what did TearFund do?
Biciye mu ishengero TearFund yarafashije guhugura wese.
Oh, well, that's much more helpful.
Nibaza ko yamaze kubitahura.
what it's saying is that TearFund didn't build the hospital. They provided the means to help other people build it for themselves. And that's the essence behind CCTV. Well, let me give you a few more examples. Because for every community, their needs are totally different, obviously. So in some circumstances, it can involve setting up self-help group. In these circumstances, people have problems, you know, with their feeling so depressed, so downhearted, and worried about what's going to happen. So set up help groups about well-being, so people can become much more positive and begin to think and approach their problem with a much more positive mind. CT can be involved starting a credit union, which you may well have heard of, which they've been doing for some while, where people can learn to save and obtain loans. And with those loans, they can start to set up a business, or they could buy livestock or seeds to grow different crops. Start building a future. I mentioned earlier too that one of the biggest problems we are facing worldwide is climate change. And that's had an absolutely devastating effect upon farming in these very poor countries. And it's had a drastic effect on the harvest and the amount of food they can grow because of lack of rain or the heat. But by better training, by better land management, better methods to conserve water, use of things which are readily available like chicken manure, they can fertilize the land and they can improve the harvest. Or they can teach farmers how to grow different crops or use different kinds of seeds which are now more appropriate for the changed circumstances. All done through training, showing people what they can really do in these circumstances. Another example, you can teach people skills. You can teach people how to set up a business and to run a business. And so one example I was reading about was a young girl. She was only 10. And because she was a girl, she wasn't allowed to go to school, which was very sad. But she had an uncle who saw a potential in her. And he made sure that she went to college and she trained to actually use a sewing machine. And with a sewing machine, she can make things. And those things she could take down to the market, and then she could sell them. And with that, she bought more sewing machines. And so she got other people working with sewing machines, making goods. And so the business grew. But we saw in the advert how these same principles can be applied on a much larger scale. Many villages don't have clean water. And so they show them how they can actually provide clean water. In some cases, that actually means digging up the road and putting down pipes, as you've seen they do in this country, to bring in water. Or it can be about building hospitals or schools. Anything is possible. In this way, can you see how even on different scales, the same principles can be applied, using the little that you have and the talents and the abilities of the people that are there to actually realize their God-given potential to bring about whole life and whole community transformation. Again, I want to illustrate this with a video, if we've got one, about the work in Burundi. Thank you very much.
Hi,
My name's Glenn, and I recently had the privilege of going to Burundi to see the work that TearFund is doing with local churches there. On our first day, we took a trip into the mountains to visit a village called Mubira. It's only 20 kilometers from where we were staying, but it took us over an hour to get there because the road was so rough and bumpy. When we arrived, the whole community was there to welcome us, and we were greeted by Pastor Obed. He described to us what life was like in the community before and the various challenges they faced. TearFund's Bible study training changed all that. The church members started to realise that everything God had already given them could then be used to help the whole community. The main challenge that Mubira faced was the lack of access to healthcare. The nearest health centre is 11 kilometres away down that bumpy road that I described at the beginning. Can you imagine having a medical emergency or being pregnant, being in labour and having to sit on the back of a motorbike going down a road like that? The church was inspired by one part of the Bible studies that TearFund uses as part of the training. Nehemiah 2 verses 10 to 20, when Nehemiah decides to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. They realised that when they come together as a community, as a church, that they could pool their resources. They raised £30,000 to be able to build their own community health centre right there in the middle of Mubira. When I was there, they had just finished building the health centre and had piped water up from the other side of the mountain so that it had running water. And I've heard that 6 months on, they're planning to put solar panels on the roof to provide electricity. Pastor Obed's church has doubled in size and he has to build a new one. In fact, they're having to plant new churches in that area because people are coming to faith. They showed us with pride their community health centre that they had built with their own hands. Mubira is just one example of how TearFund is equipping churches to transform their communities. We simply couldn't do it without the support of churches like yours. We're so grateful for all of your support and prayers. Thank you.
Can I just reiterate, indeed we are very grateful for all your help and support for TearFund and prayers for TearFund over the years. But can I also point out about that video at the end? Because through helping people to help themselves, did we also notice how the gospel was being preached? And people were coming to faith. And in such that they had to build more churches. You see the gospel in action. People can see that God is a God who will provide. A God who is a God who makes things possible. TearFund has a vision. Currently, it is partnering with something like 25,000 churches through community transformation in 50 countries. And now it has set out the goal to roll out CCT to another 250,000, 10 times more in the next 7 years. But TearFund can't do this on their own. They need help. Help in providing those learning programs, those training programs. And that's where we come in. Like the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, we have a large problem facing us, but we also have a God who will provide. And we also have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Small in comparison. But I ask you today, are you prepared to give that 5 loaves and 2 fishes? Elsewhere in other versions of this story, we're told that this 5 loaves and 2 fishes belonged to a young lad. And we can imagine how this young lad, his mum gave him his lunch. And he took his lunch along that day. And he had his, packed lunch, his 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Yet, he could have said, it's mine. I'm keeping it for myself. But did the young lad do that? He was prepared to give it to the disciples, to give it to Jesus, to help feed the 5,000. Are we prepared to do the same? God has blessed us in many different ways, and we can help contribute towards helping churches in these many countries across the world facing extreme poverty to bring about real change in their community. So this morning, I hope you've all got one of these. Yes, leaflets. They should have been on the, I was going to say pews then, on the chairs, sorry. We're not in Anglican churches now. Anyway, and on this, you'll see in the middle of it is a form. Now, I know that you as a church are very generous donators, but I would like to challenge you for yourself, whether you're prepared to perhaps give a little each month to partner with TearFund to help bring about community transformation. You know, and I'm told about £6 a month is enough to train a church. So if you are prepared to do it, and then you can fill the form in on the inside, that would be great. If you can do it this morning and give it to me, I'll make sure it gets to TearFund. That would be great too. If not, maybe you want to take it away and fill any details at home and send it off to TearFund. But you can be part of this work. You can help bring about real change. You can provide the resources for the training that is needed so that community transformation can become to different villages in different countries, 250,000 in the next 7 years. Or maybe, you know, you're saying, well, maybe I will think about it. Well, if you fill your details in, TearFund will send you more details about community transformation. And that's great too. Or if you're just interested in TearFund, well, I do have some copies of the latest Tear Times, but please ask for one if you want to know more about the work of TearFund in general. So thank you very much today. Thank you for this opportunity of sharing with you. But please do think very seriously, think very positively how you can use your 5 loaves and 2 fishes to bring about radical transformation and help people who are desperate just for food right across the world. Amen.